So there's a period though where you don't have VC funding and you haven't partnered yet. Like, is that a long period? What are you guys doing in that time?
Really, it was an all-in play for the first 2 years. It was running super lean with only a handful of staff, 4 or 5 people, and then really working hard to, convince a US partner, to be honest, to make a bet on a small company on the other side of the world.
Welcome to Benchling's Founders Chat, where we learn how top biotech founders are shaping the future of life science in this monthly series. I'm your host, Sean McCormack, and I lead emerging professional services here at Benchling. This month, it is my pleasure to be joined by Dr. Jay Rautela, founder and CEO of oNKo-innate, an Australian immuno-oncology discovery startup, which was recently named Emerging Company of the Year at the prestigious Oz Biotech and Johnson & Johnson Innovation Industry Excellence Awards. Jay is trailblazing a path for fellow biotech founders in his home country of Australia, and he has taken a unique approach to funding his startup. Welcome, Jay. It's so great to have you.
Thanks, Sean, and a real pleasure to be here on this first occasion of this series.
Jay, before we get started, could you just share a little background on yourself and maybe oNKo-innate with the audience?
Yeah, no problem at all. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, from sunny 4 o'clock in the morning, Melbourne, Australia. Like Sean mentioned, we're a small immuno-oncology company based here in Melbourne. My background really is in sort of academic science and immuno-oncology. So, very, very much a grassroots kind of story that we'll discuss here today. The company was founded probably 3 or 4 years ago now, really based on some great academic success we had as academics at the institute, and from there, really, we're inspired to take the journey, to commercializing some of our more interesting ideas. Also, as we'll discuss today, kind of a relatively meandering path for biotech in Australia, not a classical kind of story as you might see in the States. Over to you, Sean.
Yeah, Jay, maybe you could talk a little more just about like the mission of oNKo and maybe like the impetus for the name. I think that kind of stems from the research you were doing.
Yeah, look, Nick, my co-founder, and I are sort of experts really in the field of natural killer cells. So they're blood cells that are fairly frequent in your periphery. We'd realized these cells, a long time ago had pretty unique sort of anti-cancer functions. And at the time we'd founded oNKo-innate. So the name NK obviously stems from natural killer cell, and oNKo is in oncology. These cells were really the darling of that immuno-oncology space. People had sort of started to realize that, targeting T cells was one avenue, but maybe using NK cells as a therapeutic was another. So we sort of rode that wave of interest in this sort of fairly obscure cell type, I have to be honest, before oncology started to go mainstream, maybe immuno-oncology. And from there, really, as we'll discuss, struck some interesting partnerships around sort of discovery of drugs against these cells.
Awesome. So you and Nick, you're kind of experts in this field of natural killer cells. You're doing research in Australia. Can you talk to me about sort of the journey to take kind of your academic research towards industry and how that went, especially on the Australian biotech scene?
Yeah, I'll get to in a moment. I'll sort of talk maybe a little bit about the scene in general in a second. But like I mentioned, we were doing quite well academically, I would say, publishing some pretty great papers, and we were getting a lot of interest from overseas around some of these discoveries. But I guess being in Australia and being out of that sort of, I would say, flow of capital and flow of sort of venture capital and maybe sort of startup sort of attitude, we always sort of were left wondering sort of what to do with some of these discoveries. A lot of them went through traditional sort of tech transfer kind of licensing agreements, and we were sort of feeling that we were really taking a backseat in a lot of that discovery. It was still being done, but really out of our hands. And I think we, like many great ideas, I guess sometimes we had a beer at a pub one day and sort of decided to go out on a limb and do it ourselves. And that really meant sort of leaving behind our academic sort of safety net here in Australia because, for better or worse, I would say a lot of the biotech or the biology or the immunology done in Australia is at a very academic level. Sort of venturing into commercialization is something that's rarely done. And if it is done, it's sort of done in a very virtual model. But we've, from the very, very first moments of founding oNKo, wanted it to be a real live sort of startup, as you might see around Silicon Valley or the Boston area. We wanted people in an office, we wanted a team, we wanted that vibe, and it was so important to sort of make sure that we were true to that vision. And so how we got there again was an interesting one, right? So oNKo started as an idea to try and drug an immune cell, trying to make it better against cancer. We didn't have a central piece of sort of foundational IP, but what we did have was, I think, a vision and a lot of know-how, a lot of expertise, and a lot of pedigree in a field. And so it was really a platform-based company at the start. We sort of said, look, we know how to do a lot of great stuff with these cells. We know how to discover great sort of drug targets with these cells. How are we going to commercialize that, and how are we going to build a team around that was the big question we were left with.
So how does the growth happen here? Did you and Nick kind of work just together, the two of you, for a few years? Did it grow quickly? Can you talk to me about sort of how that went?
Yeah, it was slow at the start. I think like maybe many ideas that are sort of figuring out how to get traction. So for a couple of years, it was sort of Nick and I chipping away at this idea and sort of basically doing a whole bunch of dating. Look, I would assume very similar to what a lot of founders go through, on this scene in the States. You go around, you try and find a fit with, I guess, who your best sponsor or partner or venture capitalist might be. And in Australia, like I mentioned, we're kind of out of that really big capital flow in biotech. A lot of it is obviously US and maybe sort of Singapore and Europe based. So we knew that potentially we weren't in with the best chance of sort of landing a big VC deal, but nevertheless, I think we definitely explored that avenue. But what we found really hard was the venture capitalists in Australia, again, potentially didn't understand a platform play. I think that was the toughest selling point for oNKo. We've got this great idea, we've got this potentially a team around it, but we don't have a singular asset that's sort of immediately marketable. So we've sort of struggled to get traction there, but luckily enough, had some great visits to the States, and it turned out that working with Big Pharma, in fact, in sort of a partnership model was very much more favoured. And indeed, what Pharma was looking for was companies like oNKo, right? People that could generate great ideas and sort of help, nourish their pipeline whilst also, I guess, benefiting oNKo.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a period though where you don't have VC funding and you haven't partnered yet. Like, is that a long period? What are you guys doing in that time?
Yeah, basically scratching our heads a little bit. I mean, to be totally honest, you're sort of wondering, in that intervening period before we partnered with Kite and Gilead, we were sort of at a crossroads going, look, we're not going to get this big Series A that, you see often around the world. Seed funding was great, but it only takes you so far. And so really it was an all-in play for the first 2 years. It was running super lean with only a handful of staff, 4 or 5 people. And then really working hard to, I guess, convince a US partner, to be honest, to make a bet on a small company on the other side of the world. So that's, I guess, one of the slight negatives of working in Australia, right? It's a difficult sell when you can't go face to face during COVID, or pre-COVID even. It was just a huge flight and a huge effort for all parties involved to try and get to know each other. Yeah,
certainly some downsides. I mean, it's 3 a.m. there right now, right?
Loving it.
So I guess, in that vein, you secure the partnership. Then can you sort of talk about how that influenced the direction of the company? Did you stay true to your initial mission and just kind of secure the partnership, or did those sort of determine your path?
Yeah, this is a great question. And look, I'm not a big one for TED Talks and all this kind of stuff. I don't do a lot. I don't listen to a lot of those things, but there was one that really stuck with me, and I'd suggest the listeners or the viewers to check it out. It was by a guy named Tom Hulme, Hulme. I can try and find the reference to it at some stage and flick it through. But really his whole thesis around his TED Talk was really launching sort of the straw man of an idea initially can really help you sort of define what that product is, even if you don't sort of know what it is at the very start. It's almost one of those stories of it's never too early. And I think that was very much the case with oNKo. We launched the idea of this platform company to discover great new drugs around natural killer cells and to try and treat cancer. But precisely what we were doing in terms of how we were screening for those drugs, how we would develop those drugs was still emergent. But by working with by lots of interactions with, VC and pharma, and by eventually, I guess, striking a deal with some very sort of reputable sort of immuno-oncology players, you crystallized, exactly how you were going to get there. And so I guess in short answer to your question, it was very emergent. We knew, we sort of had a compass bearing, but we didn't have absolutely the trail map to get there. But it happened. And I would encourage, again, people to not be daunted by the fact that you don't have all the route planned.
Yeah, maybe going back a step, because it's sort of interesting. I'm sure there's, a number of people listening that are kind of at the stage that you were in 2017 or 2018. How do you get your foot in the door for those partnership conversations? Like, were you just cold emailing? Did you have help? What did that look like?
That's hard. Yeah. Again, great question. It's almost like, we're in Australia. We don't, it's having contacts in the States is kind of a big deal. I mean, it's just because travel is not as frequent, and the market within it, the States, is pretty plentiful, I would say, for new ideas and good ideas. So for a little Australian company to go knocking on the door of big pharma, it is probably shrugged off a lot of the time. We were lucky that we had a couple of contacts early on at a few of these big pharma, and they were kind enough to make some early introductions. And really, I think the thing that opened the door most for us was that seminal academic publication we had just before we left our previous institute. So we defined a new sort of class of drug targets, so to speak. We sort of said that, look, traditional oncology checkpoints don't have to be antibodies on the cell surface. They can be within a cell. They can be cytoplasmic, right? And we defined an intracellular checkpoint. It was called CIS, that basically blunted a cell's ability to sort of become hyperactive. And if you got rid of that checkpoint, the cells were just better at most things, including killing cancer cells. And so we put that out there into the ether and sort of said, look, there's this new class of checkpoints within cells. We're going to call this a novel NK cell checkpoint. What does the field think about it? And the reception was really, really impressive, right? Like I was sort of saying to you in a previous call, we were having phone calls from big US VC that we didn't really know what to do with, because we were sort of at a stage where we just had this academic thing and we didn't know, how far it would go. But having that paper out there as kind of that landmark, really, I guess, sort of awakened and piqued the interest of other pharma partners.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's kind of a combination of like novel discovery, a lot of grit, maybe some contacts, but definitely a hustle to get there, it sounds like. I want to talk a little bit about sort of what you were alluding to earlier, which is now you kind of have some partnership. You're thinking about scaling a team. You're in Australia. What was it like doing that, hiring? Maybe you can talk a little bit more about what the biotech scene is like, if you'd like.
Yeah. So definitely in sort of another growth phase now, and want to keep going. I'd love oNKo to sort of be a long-lived, pretty innovative, ambitious company locally. I don't really want to see oNKo be sort of sold or liquidated as a single asset company, and I think for that reason, the hiring strategy and the people we got on the ground was always with the vision of longevity, and so we've sort of created the company around three sort of core pillars of R&D. One being our, really amazing functional genomic group. So we are, absolutely crushing it, to be honest, in terms of finding new drug targets in immune cells. I mean, we screen like no tomorrow, and I think we've discovered, huge new sort of target landscapes that have, got almost no literature around them and no sort of known biology. So I think we're in a really rich sort of seam of, drug discovery in terms of really fundamental science. But layered on top of that, we make sure, I guess, we've got a really strong computational team and a really strong sort of antibody and sort of biologics discovery group. Again, making sure that we have all the pieces under one roof to try and execute to a plan of making a drug. But hiring has been difficult because, like I mentioned, it's a pretty nascent sort of area at biotech in Australia. We've got a couple of really big behemoths located in Australia that are in sort of the pharma space. But other than that, the crop of sort of early stage oncos is just not there. Yeah. Again, because it's a very academically sort of minded sort of ecosystem at the moment. So trying to hire people with the requisite biotech skills has been difficult. But having said that, I have been consistently amazed at how quickly really top academics can pivot from thinking about publication through to straightaway product. And I think that that's just a testament to, I guess, the flexibility of, training PhD level graduates to think outside the box. So difficult. Not a lot of people with huge biotech CVs, but a lot of very intelligent people willing to take that risk with us, which is great.
Yeah. You say difficult, but I mean, I think knowing your growth, you have doubled over and over again over the past couple of years, right? You have scaled quite a bit.
Yeah, I say difficult because maybe, this has been my first time journey. It's always, you always feel like you're hustling to sort of meet, your ambitions and the team's ambitions. But we've been very pleasantly surprised, like I said, that people now are sort of taking not only onco, but sort of biotech more seriously. I think we flew under the radar for many years here in Melbourne because we were a US-facing company. We had a footprint here, but we didn't do really any publicity locally. Just there wasn't need, and there was COVID. Then we won, I guess, that J&J award, and things started to sort of warm up a little bit. And now, luckily, it's less of an issue. But I think maybe the difficulty that I was alluding to is more, it's not so much recruiting good academic scientists, it's recruiting people that have traveled the biotech journey before. So, a lot of us are sort of first timers, which is fun, but also interesting.
Yeah, I think kind of digging into that first timer question, there's sort of another element here of you're scaling this company, you're more than 30 people now. How are you thinking about building culture there? You talked a bit about in our last call about oNKo being kind of a family and the kind of the startup culture you wanted to build, but talk me through that and how it looks.
Yeah, look, again, I'm probably not saying anything particularly sort of remarkable or new to people that sort of understand sort of biotech and growing a team, but the team and I guess the culture within that team is probably the most important thing you'll ever do. I think the rest you can kind of learn. And certainly that's my view from this, again, first time CEO, right? Like I said, we've taken some really astounding academics that were doing really well, and they've all pivoted to sort of being really amazing sort of biotech operators. So I think that part can be learned without an issue. It's the culture that's set very early on and very difficult to change. Again, in my limited understanding. So getting that right was always top of our list. And so we hired not only on the basis, I guess, of, being smart. I think that's part of it, right? But by being a really good team player and also sharing that vision. And I think for, the first, obviously the founders, but then maybe the first 20, 30, 40, 50 people, that is absolutely crucial. Yeah. Beyond that, I think the culture becomes, it has its own inertia, I guess, and it becomes easy to bring people on board and for them to buy into it, to understand what we're all doing. But setting that very early on was important. So like I said, we hired based on attitude and ambition and, did you want to be here or was this just a job? And I think luckily enough, again, the first 35 people we've got on board have all just seen this as not just a job, but a kind of a journey together.
Yeah, that's it. And can you talk a little bit about, so most of them came from academia, right? I think you had said it was like more than 80%. Having that large of your team come from academia directly into industry, what are the advantages and sort of disadvantages there? Was it challenging to kind of get everybody moving in one direction? Yeah,
yes and no. To be honest, I think the overwhelming feeling that or the impression I got from most of these academic, staff that joined us was almost a feeling of decompression. They'd walk into oNKo and sort of be like, you know what, I don't actually have to fight about first and last authorship on a paper, and I don't have to fight about this is mine and that's yours. It was just kind of like, we're all in this together, and it's great if you're going to help me on this, and we'll just pull in the same direction. So luckily, that has been a very natural, I think, consequence of leaving academia and coming to biotech. But I think we still had to be fairly proactive about instilling some sort of biotech-like culture to motivate, but also inspire and get those creative juices flowing. So, if you go for a walk around our offices, I would say it's maybe a little bit like many of the Silicon Valley startups. We've got beer taps, we've got bean bags, we've got the whole shebang, right? You've got to kind of make it feel like a biotech, not just sort of pretend like you're a biotech. So that I think has put a smile on many people's faces, but also sort of how you do things here. I mean, academically, like I was mentioning, Sean, previously, many of the staff were used to just taking notes on a piece of paper and then losing that piece of paper, or using a half-baked reagent that had someone's name scrawled on it, or all sorts of like really loose kind of like operations. And coming in here again, setting the culture was the biggest thing, but then sort of putting in place some really appropriate sort of controls around, how we do things in a really well curated and traceable manner was important. And, maybe the reason why we're on this call today is for us, Benchling was one of those early things. It was important for our staff to sort of understand that, we do things here that are auditable, trackable, and easily exportable and searchable, because you have people come and go and lab books go missing. But on top of that, kind of had to make it feel different from academia. And I think that was a great plus, right? So if they have to come in and use a Swish, web-based interface to put the data in, and then I have to sort of sign it off or whatever, for them it was almost a bit gamified. They were sort of like, all right, look, we've got to finish our entries, we've got to do all our stuff, and it really early on it was kind of a great positive feedback. And it's only, I guess, one example of sort of how we tried to change people's sort of mindset from behaving academically to behaving more sort of commercially, but in a positive way.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you maybe speak a little bit about, because it's sort of, unfortunately, this growth sort of aligned with the COVID pandemic. And so what was it like kind of scaling the team, getting more partnerships through this period? How has that been for you? Maybe Benchling helped in some way with kind of the data sources. But would love to hear about that.
Yeah. Again, like I sort of said to you guys offline, Melbourne had the very, unpleasant honor of being the world's most locked down city. I mean, we did lock down pretty hard through COVID, unfortunately, and we got a bit of a reputation for that. And it wasn't an easy time, I don't think, for anyone around the world. Luckily, our team didn't get locked down. I guess our research was deemed sort of, important enough that we still went into the office, so we were spared the worst of it. Yeah. So, a big thank you, I guess, to the powers that be that allowed that to happen. But, throughout that, though, we really had to digitize everything. I mean, there was no need to come into the office if you just had to do emails, right? So really collaboratively working online was key. I mean, we're all Zoom experts now and all that kind of stuff. Certainly the way we do lab science and sort of data entry and note-taking and all that kind of stuff was a key part of that. There's no doubt. I think without moving to an online platform for most of our work, whether it be sort of commercially contract-based or whether it be lab sort of data-based, saved us no end. There's no doubt about that. And I think, having lived through that experience now where Zoom is the norm, where, cloud-based solutions for everything is the norm, it's sort of really, I think, democratized biotech for Australia to some degree. Yeah. I think now that we're online, it's not as hard to go to the States, virtually or to Europe virtually. So there were a lot of, I think, benefits, considering.
Maybe, I don't know, that's not really a related question, but as you're thinking about sort of the next stages of oNKo, like what is your ambition there? How are you thinking about scaling? Maybe like what's keeping you up at night in terms of what you got to do next? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I think continuing, we're a relatively small country by US standards, right? I think it's like 23, 4, 5 million people in the country, and a lot of the biotech and a lot of the sort of the life sciences R&D is concentrated on the East Coast in two major cities, Melbourne and Sydney. So I think the depth of people coming through wanting to do biotech is eventually going to be a limiting factor, especially if more and more founders are inspired to do startups in Australia. But in that vein, I really think, not too far away, it'll become an attractive proposition for people to come to Australia for that reason. At the moment, a lot of, the best and brightest travel to get this biotech experience. Hopefully then we start recruiting back into Australia because, borders are pretty permeable now. It's not an issue to fly in, fly out, work in different countries. We've all been there and done that. So I think recruiting on an international level for us is going to be the next big growth opportunity and where we'll focus. Like I said, the depth of talent is fantastic here, but there are certain sort of skill sets that we definitely miss. And what keeps me up at night, really delivering on our mission of creating a cancer therapy above all else, right? I think, it's all great to talk about, I want to get to this number, I want to sort of do this, I want to build a building, I want to get this sort of funding. It's less about that, but more about really showing, value for more value out of the team. I think everyone's worked so hard so far to get where we are that it would be a shame that, if oNKo didn't deliver a blockbuster therapy one day in the future. So everything is pointing towards that, I hope. But naturally, in order to get there, we have to scale in size. So I'd like to see, 200, 300, 400 people at some not too distant future time point.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're rooting for you. I guess maybe another question here. Benchling, of course, has hundreds of emerging companies that are joining on. I think there's a lot of founders and CEOs that are sort of first-time founders, just like you. What has been like the most surprising part about kind of your journey, and then maybe what has been like the most difficult part about being like a first-time founder, CEO, running this biotech?
The most surprising part would have to be, I think, how important common sense is. Common sense is not that common. To be totally honest, I think a lot of people have absolutely the wherewithal to do what I do, to do what the team does. To be honest, it's a very exciting journey, and if you're motivated enough, I don't doubt that there can be countless others doing exactly what we do. So I think really having a good, what's the best way to put it? I don't want to be rude on this call because I've got a certain term that I use for it, but having a really good radar for like sense checking, a direction or a person or an idea, I think, it was the most surprisingly important skill that I think that I've had to use. It hasn't been, my MBA or my PhD training in immunology. Look at that. That's great. It's cool to have that background knowledge. But yeah, being very good at thinking on your feet and I guess sense checking people and ideas has been the most surprising. The most difficult part, I would have to say, is back to sort of your question about gaining credibility from Australia. I think we're very talented. There's no doubt about it. I think we punch above our weight in terms of sort of intellectual input. But credibility, I mean, we didn't come out of an Ivy League sort of US school, right? And even, Australian Ivy League, so to speak, universities are not super well, internationally recognized. Yeah. So, breaking down those barriers of like going, look, this is us, this is what we can do, and not being brushed aside. So those early pharma chats and all early VC chats were really, I think, inspiring. I mean, we met a lot of closed doors, as you could imagine. They're like, oh, look, this is not sort of our thing. But after a while, you got to understand what people want to hear, what sort of messaging, how you deliver it. Again, not knowing any of this as a first-time CEO and just an academic was the most difficult.
I guess it's kind of going backwards in our conversation, but in terms of that credibility and knocking on doors, were you coming in with like a pitch deck and your paper and like an idea for a platform, or what are you bringing to the table in those early conversations trying to establish credibility?
Yeah, pretty much that. Saying, look, we've got academic pedigree. I mean, Nick much more than myself, obviously, but combined over sort of 20, 25 years in this space, knowing this cell type, knowing immuno-oncology, right? So I think that was relatively undeniable. It was then how are you putting sort of a commercial framework around that? Like, it's great to be an academic, but how are you going to sort of benefit, the potential partner's mission, but how are you also going to deliver on your own? That was always the big question. And so the pitch deck was, again, looking back on it now, pretty underdeveloped, right? But the ideas were always there. The ideas were, look, we're going to put together the best team that we know how. We're going to create this engine of discovery. We are going to find stuff that no one else is working on, which is, again, exactly what we always set out to do. And then we are going to slowly transition into sort of more of a development company and actually execute upon making a drug. And I think we're sort of right in that middle point now. I think in the next few years, it'll be quite telling how we go. But luckily enough, there were, again, farm partners that believed in that because their internal discovery engines were potentially, lacking an NK cell, company like us. So there was definitely fit and there was appetite, but it was, again, putting it into a nicely understandable package was really the learning curve.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's really a fantastic story, Jay. And we're so excited from the Benchling side to be kind of like joining you on this journey as you scale the team, hopefully, helping to provide you good software along the way and kind of make your lives easier. I want to sort of pivot the conversation to the little fun parts of the discussion. First, I just want to say to the audience, Jay and I had a call a few weeks ago, and he noticed my bike in the background. And he said that he wanted to ride with us when he came out to the States. And so we actually have a ride scheduled. I asked him how long he wanted to ride, and he said 100, and I assumed he was talking about kilometers because he's Australian, but it seems that you can pick and choose your units of measure, and so we're looking at doing a longer ride, maybe 100 miles in a few weeks. So Jay, can you talk about maybe your coolest cycling experience? Anything you could say about that, or your biotech on bikes idea?
Yeah, that was an ambitious, being flexible with my units. Look, I can be pushed to do, the conversion from miles to kilometers or whatever. Look, it's, great comment. I think the whole journey, irrespective of actually sort of the commercial realities of running a startup company and all that, for Nick and I, it's always been about kind of just really having fun. I mean, I don't want to sort of belittle or demean, I guess, the mission in any way by saying that, but we were having a great time in academia, wanted to do that basically, tenfold over with more people and more energy, but always keeping that fun attitude. And so, we've always tried to have that sort of playful nature at oNKo. One of our outlets, not everyone at oNKo cycles, to be honest. That's not a prerequisite to getting a job, believe me. We're not like that. But one of our outlets is, just jumping on the bike and talking trash, really. We did sort of start a bit of a funny, series on Instagram and I think on Twitter, where Nick and I just ride around a velodrome or ride one of the courses near our house and just talk about the latest kind of like IPOs or Series A raises or something like that. And, we're not always super supportive. We do question, we do pick at the scab, and we try and sort of like really understand what's going on. And look, I hope to sort of bring that to a bigger series over the coming years. But really the love of biking is, something that I developed after meeting Nick. And it's turned out that in many ways sort of biking is the new golf. So we've met a lot of like really cool sort of like founders and sort of interesting individuals along the way just from going on rides. And it's surprising the conversations you have, even if you're totally out of breath up a climb. And the people that you meet on the bike. So, Sean, when we come over, can't wait to go for a ride and can't wait to be dropped up the first hill.
Yeah, I'll make sure to say that biking is the new golf next time I'm hitting 120 on the golf course. Okay, before we turn it over to the Q&A, I know there's a lot of questions popping into the chat that we want Jay to get to. We do have one more segment. We're going to play Two Truths and a Lie here. If you haven't heard of Two Truths and a Lie before, there's going to be 3 statements from Jay. One of those is not true. And we're going to try to guess in the poll on your sidebar which is which. I haven't seen these either, so I guess we'll all guess together here. And you should see that poll tab for the audience kind of on the sidebar there, and you can take a vote. Okay.
Do I read out the statements?
We could. I mean, I could read them out. When he was a child, his neighbor's dog got eaten by a tiger. I don't know if you were. I don't know if there's tigers in Australia. He likes to vacuum the office floors after everyone has left, and he can backflip and on skis and on a mountain bike. Ooh. I think I'm going to vote.
Which one is the lie?
I'm voting for tiger. Give it a minute.
I love seeing
here.
these statistics come in.
I don't know, though. Is there a lot of good skiing in Australia, Jay? Like, where are you skiing?
Not heaps. No, there's kind of like a hill that's kind of a bit frosty sometimes.
I've been skiing a long time, and I can't do a backflip, so I don't know.
No, there's not a whole heap of good skiing, but it's another reason why I go to Europe and the States, all right?
All right, we're dead even here. We need one more person to vote. There we go, Jay. I think you can let us know where's the truth, where's the lies here. There we go.
What's the final? 42, 38, 19. Okay, well, controversial, but I think I've beaten all you guys if actually sort of sneaking the lie through is winning. So I wasn't actually born in Australia, and indeed, yes, my neighbour's dog did get eaten by a tiger. That was full on. So that one is a truth, believe it or not. So it wasn't in Australia, but it's a truth. The second one is also a truth. It's a weird quirk, I know, right? So sometimes you just need a bit of quiet time to think and reflect on what's been going on. And I do bust out the vacuum cleaner more regularly than I should. I just put the headphones in and I just vacuum the floors, right? Someone needs to do it. I don't mind doing it, and it gives me, pause for thought. Definitely have tried to backflip both of those things. Haven't quite succeeded yet, but I will one day. I'll either do that or I'll end up in hospital. I don't know. But yeah, so the last one's a lie, unfortunately.
Well, not a lot of dogs getting eaten by tigers out here in the States. I can relate to the vacuuming thing. I bought a Dyson, and it's a great user experience. I'm always doing it. Jay, maybe we turn it over to the Q&A here. I'll just sort of read out the questions. We've got at least 15 minutes. We can kind of run through these as we go. Sure. So the first one is, do you have any tips on how to manage early R&D costs for therapeutic startup founders?
Tough one. Yeah. Look, I mean, again, my experience is going to be relatively, I guess, different to all yours, unless the question's from Australia. Luckily, here we've got some, pretty good tax incentives to I guess incentivize small startups to invest in R&D, but they're by no means kind of a panacea, right? I mean, you get some tax back, which is a great thing. I'd say outsourcing and working with academics to some extent, as long as I guess you can secure your IP, appropriately, is one way of trying to bring that down. But it's an expensive business, and to be honest, that's I think one of the reasons why Australia's kind of done well academically, but hasn't taken off sort of on the biotech stage, because the infrastructure and the peripheral sort of I guess platforms that need to be invested in are not here currently. For example, if we need to work with a CRO, they're often not here. I mean, 99% of the time they're not in Australia. A, because it's too expensive on an FTE level to pay for that in Australia, and B, just because there's not enough people demanding that service. So costs are high, and unfortunately, they're probably even higher in Australia than the States. Right? We buy equipment, and all the time I see it 4 times the price here than it is in the States for whatever reason. Right? I don't think air freight's that expensive, to be honest. But it's a tough business, and managing it. The only way I've learned to manage it is to hire very competent people, because for us, the FTE cost is probably the most expensive part of it all. And so, the 35 people we've invested in so far are absolutely like amazing human beings and hyper productive and all that. So we're very, very lucky. So that would be my one comment, is just try and find highly motivated individuals that will, I guess, get you there quicker, rather than sort of having to load on twice as many staff. But short of being very careful with your finances, there's not a great answer to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Apologies if I didn't give you any great tips there.
Great businesses being built on great people is sort of a good tip in itself. So maybe the next question here is, how important is publicity for partnership? Can you talk about sort of how you advocated after you got the partnerships?
That's a good one, a really good one, because we've probably done everything you shouldn't do. Realistically speaking, I mean, I'd say a fairly big introvert. I don't sort of love going and speaking publicly. It's great speaking in front of you guys, because it's basically just Sean and I on a screen, right? I'd be much more intimidated if I was on stage. And I think that actually flows through a little bit to our approach for publicity, which, in all fairness, it shouldn't. I think we should be out there a bit more publicly and sort of pushing the name a bit more. And I think this is one of the first efforts we've had to sort of put our name on an international stage. I think it is very important. I think for oNKo, we could have done a lot more to build that brand before going and making a lot of those connections and partnerships. But again, it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing for us, because if you don't have a big partnership backing you up, or a big sort of Series A, I mean, what sort of brand are you building? So I agree. Any sort of publicity you can sort of do to sort of push what your vision is, I would say go for it, and maybe don't take the fairly stealth route that oNKo's taken. It works in Australia, but I would say probably less so in other domains.
Next question here for you is, what resources were the most helpful for you when learning how to build a company? What resources did you wish you had as a PhD student? I
honestly wish I had some mentors, because I had sort of no one to bounce any ideas off at any stage in this career, this journey. It's always been about sort of flying by the seat of your pants, so to speak. It's like make a mistake and fix it, make a mistake and fix it. And we're obviously not afraid of making mistakes, right? My countless attempts at trying to do backflips is testament to that, right? So I think it would have been great to, I guess, have had that mentorship, and I think, again, inherently more available in markets such as the States. That would be my biggest sort of response to that. It would have, I guess, saved a lot of time and a lot of heartache, but we got there in the end.
Do you have a mentor now, Jay?
No, look, that's the other thing. I sort of don't. I look to my team really as the main point of mentoring. It's sort of like, if I'm doing things right by them, then I think I'm doing all right. But certainly don't have that senior C-suite executive from some big organization that I can pick up the phone to.
I don't know if you're going to have a position on this one, but it's been upvoted a lot. What is your view on equity versus debt funding for a startup?
Great one. For me, look, again, I think everyone's journey is going to be a bit different, and what your vision for that company is. If it's a single piece of IP that's easy to sort of move, I think you're a bit more flexible in how you finance things. Because again, I think if it's a well-known piece in a box, you can probably have those conversations with any sort of financing sort of partner. For oNKo, again, because it was a relatively obscure platform initially, the opportunity for those types of financing were limited. But what I will say is that my preference always for oNKo has been to limit equity financing, because I think people wouldn't have understood oNKo's sort of ambition very early on. That may change in the future as, I guess, our path, as I've mentioned, crystallizes a bit more, and there's inherent ways to value and appreciate what we're doing. But keeping sort of a fragile idea afloat and keeping a team together and making sure, I guess, you're trying to do the best by both them and what Nick and I set out to do and have a lot of fun. We tried to really limit, I guess, that equity piece. So for me, it would be debt financing if possible, for a platform from Australia, right? But your journey will be different.
Yeah. Here's a fun one. What are your thoughts on needing a PhD to start a company?
Not at all. Like I said, I mean, I don't think anything I do is particularly remarkable. I think what the team does as a unit is really remarkable. And I think anyone with an inherent level of, understanding and I guess common sense, like I mentioned, can do this job. I don't think there should be any stigma around not going for it if you don't have a PhD, really. I think it's a fun few letters after my name, but it didn't define the journey at all.
I'm gonna take a snippet of this and send it to my mother, Jay, so that she knows it's still possible. Although she's probably gonna say I don't have common sense either, so who knows?
I'm sure you do.
What else do we got here? How did you navigate investing in employee satisfaction and avoiding burnout during this kind of building phase of your company?
Yeah, look, something we're still actively doing, right? I don't think that journey's never sort of navigated. I think it's a constant thing, and I think through COVID, it's been even more poignant. All people could do for the last 2 years was either come to work or quarantine at home, right? And so I think there was a level of burnout there that was really real. I think, again, from the outset, oNKo has tried to be as balanced as possible about work life. We've tried to recruit people on the basis that academia kind of exploits people to work weekends, work after hours for this, this nature paper or whatever it is you're trying to get. But oNKo, we sort of said, look, if you can come and do your hours during the week, we have absolutely no problem with you, being really reasonable, taking the weekends off, not coming in early, not coming in late, and trying to, live your best life outside the company. And I think we just did basically a team satisfaction poll last week, and that was really reflected in that people appreciated the fact that we respected their boundaries, living outside of the company, and also the demands placed on them. Like, we do expect a lot, in terms of performance, because people are super smart and super motivated, but we also really want to give back a lot. And that means not being demanding, in their personal time. So I just think being cognizant of that and not messaging people at 9:30 at night or sort of, putting undue requests on them really helps. But always having that feedback mechanism in place, like that barometer, that poll. Your team will tell you if things are, going too far one way or the other. So yeah, listen is my only comment there.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe a few more here, 2 or 3 more questions. How do you marry kind of having a great scientific idea with sort of this potential to commercialize it, which can be sort of 2 different things?
Look, that's been the eternal struggle for oNKo. I think, I've tried to maybe articulate that throughout the chat today. Yeah. It is hard because I think there are the commercial reality is that you have to provide some sort of return on investment, whatever that investment might be. And if people can't understand the value proposition around some great scientific idea, then it's not valuable inherently. Even though, you might think it's the next best thing, it's just not valuable until you can, really articulate that value proposition. And that was an extremely hard thing to do with oNKo at the start. We were going around sort of saying, look, we know heaps about these cells. We know how to screen with them. We know how to discover drugs. But, to the VCs locally or to, those first few pharma calls, how do they put sort of a bucket around that and sort of understand, what it is that you're bringing to them? So I think that is the $1 million question. If you've got the latest, nuclease or latest something that is patentable and very understandable, I don't think there's any problem putting a value around that and commercializing it. I think it's very difficult for platform-based companies. And there are many examples over the years where a platform company has gone, totally under the radar for 10 years. And then all of a sudden that technology has become flavor of the month and then it's taken off. So again, don't be disheartened if I guess your idea is one of those that fly under the radar for some time, but financing it through that journey is tough. I get that.
Yeah. Jay, was oNKo your first startup idea?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think I was always slightly that way inclined. I remember when I was a young kid, we used to have a bit of a club. So I used to live in the rural part of Australia, and we basically used to pool money from the neighborhood to try and buy like fireworks and stuff. And I kept ratcheting up the admission price to that club, right? So I could sort of get more and more fireworks and, cause more and more trouble. So I guess I was always sort of slightly inclined to try and, pull together people and try and do something with it. But I wouldn't say I was, inherently the most remarkable entrepreneur that this country's ever seen, but by no stretch of the imagination, right? I think very sort of standard sort of upbringing, I would say, in that respect.
Yeah. So it sounds like there was a firework pyramid scheme, and then maybe a missed opportunity to develop like a tiger-proof dog suit or something. But
well, that's it. And I think I don't want to downplay the role that luck and chance have in all of this, right? I think had I not met Nick and had we not sort of been highly aligned in I guess what we wanted to do, probably wouldn't be here today. So it's a really interesting point. There can be sort of an inherent sort of ability in a person, like I was sort of saying about the academics we've recruited. A lot of them I think are inherently exceptional in this biotech space, but were never given the space to do it. Luckily, oNKo's now that space. And like many of the founders on the call today, I would suggest that many of you are probably thinking, very, intelligent strategies about how to take your idea to the next level. But, finding that spark or that space is the difficult one, but persistence definitely pays off.
Maybe last question here, Jay. What was the role that data science initiatives played in oNKo-innate's R&D processes? Can you talk about that? Maybe talk about how Benchling has helped support that.
Yeah, so important. I mean, we understood that there was only a limited amount of wet lab stuff we could do, right? I mean, we've got 35 people, most of them in the lab, but we couldn't screen with every single cell type on Earth. We didn't have every single sort of, sequencing data set that we could generate internally. So we had to make sure that our team of computational biologists could pull in, again, all of the data that's publicly available and more to try and bolster our internal efforts. And I think for us, Benchling's been kind of a nucleation point for that in many ways. We do a lot outside of Benchling, for various reasons, but it is the point where I guess the data science guys meet the biology guys online, which I think is really sort of an exceptional tool. Prior to that, it would just be, I guess, the occasional presentation from, the computational guys to the biologists. But now really the computational people can dial in, look at what the biologists have done, what have the experiments been done, how have they set that experiment up? Once they've understood the screen we've done, they can then go and apply that retroactively to maybe a patient data set. So very valuable, and it cuts down, I guess, a lot on like communication problems. Like, often we don't, people are busy in the lab and the data science guys will just want to ask one question but can't find the team. If you can find that straight away in a platform online, it's the dream really for them. So super important, and Benchling, like I said, a real nucleation point.
Yeah, I love this kind of idea of the data scientists having just like immediate access, right? I think in my time in industry as well, it's like we're gonna have a bi-weekly or a monthly presentation. It's gonna be on PowerPoint. Here's what we did, and this is like, well, what questions can we answer now? So very exciting.
It's just to that point though, it's really been a platform where the data scientists have also almost become biologists, because they read sort of entries into the notebook and they fundamentally understand the biology question that's being asked before then going and doing their data science sort of overlay. So without that, I think again we'd be sort of missing connections that have been made possible now. So really, that was a great question.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions today. Jay, I want to just thank you tons for your time joining us. I'll see you in a few weeks on the bike ride. I'll be here in a few weeks for the next episode if I do make it back from that bike ride with Jay. 100 miles is a long way. Before we do wrap up today's episode, I want to take a quick second to sort of tease our speaker for next month. So on April 21st at 10 a.m., we will be joined by David Nels, CEO, chief scientist, and co-founder of U1 Bio. His research pioneered the use of CRISPR-Cas9 to target RNA in human cells. David is also a two-time founder and a current resident of J Labs. Since all of you attendees in the audience are already registered, no need to register again. We'll just send you out an email with a link 2 weeks out from the episode. So we have a very excited talk lined up. We're really glad that you all joined us today. And really in closing, we'd just like to thank you, the audience, for attending today's inaugural episode featuring Jay Rautela. And then Jay, thanks so much again. If anybody wants to hear more about Benchling or oNKo-innate, our links are here and you can join us on the website. So thanks so much, and we'll talk to you next month.